Podcast 122. Boxing's biggest names, boxing's biggest stories, boxing's biggest fights, greatest memories and moments. We dissect it all, and we do it with boxing historian, writer, author, CompuBox counter from friendly West Virginia. There he is, Lee Groves. How you doing, Lee?
I'm doing well, Smitty. And you know, do you remember how Sesame Street ended all of its shows by saying that it was sponsored by a given letter or a number or whatever? Well, you know, when you think about it, this past weekend's action could have been sponsored by the letter U, upsets, Ukraine, and Usyk. And in that vein, let's start by discussing last
Well,
weekend.
hold up. First off, you didn't let me. Does a guy like me from Miami,
Yeah.
cool as the other side of the pillow, as Stuart Scott would have said, do you think a guy like me watched Sesame Street? Man, I was born watching James Bond and Miami Vice later on, and you know, serial killer stuff and classic no Sesame Street. But since you started with that, I'll let you explain.
Well, yeah, upsets Ukraine and Usyk, the letter U, right?
I don't have a problem with that. It's Sesame Street that's for those other broadcasters, pugilistic pups. But I like where you're going with this, and I actually know where you're going with it. So go.
Okay, so in that vein, let's start by discussing last weekend's historic showdown that saw Oleksandr Usyk defeat Tyson Fury by split decision to become the new undisputed heavyweight champion. Now, last week, you and Tommy said that given the styles, this was going to be a very highly technical fight, a fight that wouldn't be very exciting from an actual action standpoint. Well, it turned out to be more action-packed than anyone had a right to believe or expect. Were you surprised by the way the fight unfolded from an action standpoint and how it unfolded from a strategic standpoint?
What was it that Usyk said like a day before the fight that really impressed you? What did he tell Fury he was going to do?
Yeah, he said he was not going to leave him alone. And that told me that he might up his work rate and be aggressive with Tyson Fury. Well, the stats say that Tyson Fury landed or threw more punches than Usyk, but Usyk was so much more accurate with his, and he was so effectively aggressive.
Thank you. Yeah, the aggressor in the fight, with the exception of a few rounds, the guy making the fight was the smaller man from Ukraine, the guy who gave up 6 inches in height, 8 inches in reach, 30-some-odd pounds in weight, 2 years the elder. He was the guy making the fight against the great Gypsy King. And that's what made it much more interesting to watch visually. Imagine if Usyk had not picked up the rate and been the aggressor, much more, by the way, than he normally does, at least as a heavyweight. First off, I don't think he would have won the fight had he laid back and let Fury come forward and use that massive size, the body attack, and the uppercuts. So, yeah, I agree with you. It was much more aesthetically pleasing, you know, than one would have thought, certainly than I thought.
Yeah, we both thought that Usyk won the first 3 rounds by being aggressive and keeping Fury on the back foot. And Fury did some clowning around, especially on the ropes where he grabbed both ends and he tried to act like Muhammad Ali, slipping punches and all that. But then Fury settled down, starting in round 4. On my card, he swept rounds 4 through 7 by attacking the body. And after 7 rounds, there was reason to believe that Fury had finally figured things out and he had seized control of the match, was on his way to winning a decision. And after 7 rounds, I sent you a text, Smitty, and I said, you know what, if Usyk's going to win this fight, he's going to have to make an adjustment. Well, he made that adjustment. He took control of the match. He scored the fight's only knockdown, and he ended up winning on 2 of the 3 scorecards. I had the fight scored 116 to 111 for Usyk. I believe that you had a similar score. What was
I had it 117, 111. I think the only difference in our cards, which are curiously usually pretty similar, I had one even round because the few of those rounds that just were razor close, you know me, I'll go with I have no problem in the world of boxing calling an even round, which I do, and which should be done if it's razor close. There's this thing of it has to be one way or another is garbage. But either way, without question, the right guy won the fight.
He did win the fight. And there was a little bit of a controversy regarding the lone knockdown of the fight. It was a but for the ropes knockdown. It wasn't a clear knockdown, but some people say that referee Mark Nelson waited too long to score the knockdown. Some people said he shouldn't have scored it at all, and that negatively affected Fury's chances of winning the fight, so on and so forth. How did you see that part of the fight? Did Mark Nelson do the right thing? What are your thoughts?
And many people thought he should have stopped it too, which I don't agree with. I think because we've seen, and he knew of the recuperative powers of Tyson Fury, who has tremendous recuperative powers. Gosh, he showed us that against Wilder on more than one occasion. But Nelson, and I've been texting him back and forth, he wanted to come on the show, but he's a little jet lagged and busy. We'll see him in Canastota at the Hall of Fame, and then he'll be on with us after that. I thought he did a fantastic job. And a lot of it was his own skill and perception under the biggest and brightest lights. And maybe some of it was luck too. But once Fury got hurt, the first time he went back, the ropes really didn't hold him up because he was buzzed, but he was still there. And then as he floundered around, when replays showed us how correctly Nelson did, because a lot of the shots were missing. A lot of the Fury punches were missing. And then the last little coup de grace combination that landed put Fury against the ropes. And, you saw it there, that last one. And that's when Nelson appropriately ruled it a knockdown, because clearly the ropes were holding Fury on or up, at that moment. So honestly, it was under extremely difficult circumstances. Nelson did the right thing. And let me continue. He also gave him the a count, little bit of a half sobriety test, but not too much. And then the round ended. And then we saw what took place. Fury recovered. The fight went the distance. Everything about the way Mark Nelson handled that was spot on, in my opinion.
Agreed. I think if you take a look at the overhead shot, you could see that everything that Smitty said was correct. And only when he was on the ropes and it looked like he lost totally his balance, he fell into the ropes. That's when Mark Nelson stepped in and made the call. And for him to keep his head in that chaotic moment, that speaks to his experience and his level-headedness. Now, the decision ended up being split, as we said, and there were scorecards that were all over the place. And you got criticized for the wide margin that you had. And we were talking on the phone about it. Maybe this would be a good time to just explain the 4 criterion of judging and how most people score fights these days, and what's wrong with that and what's right with using all the criterion.
And one of the biggest problems with it is education. I think we're going to get into that with the announcers that call these fights today. I think we're going to get into that later on. But again, there's supposed to be 4 criteria to score a damn prize fight. Clean, hard punching. 1. Effective aggressiveness. 2. Ring generalship, which nobody understands, apparently. 3. and defense, which nobody cares about, 4. And if you break those down, my eyes, the way I've been trained to watch and call fights, calling thousands of fights over my career, I put all of that into perspective when watching each round. You're supposed to score each second of the fight, and it gets difficult. But the point is, this fight was not really that difficult if you use the 4 criteria. Typically, Usyk was winning those rounds. He was the one coming forward. In terms of clean, hard punching, it was about even. But in that fight, the cleanest and the hardest punches were Usyk. I mean, he's the one that scored the knockdown with the ropes. In terms of ring generalship, clearly, the smaller man from Ukraine was doing what he wanted to do, with the exception of those middle rounds.
Right.
Beginning, he dominated. End, he dominated. Fury really did well and looked like he was taking over the fight in 4, 5, and 6. And then defense, you can flip a coin. But I would say the better defense was Usyk, because he was the guy making the fight, using his head, upper body movement, side to side, and got himself in position to score that knockdown and nearly got a stoppage. So it wasn't difficult to score. Reminded me a little bit, of Gennady Golovkin and Canelo, their first fight, how that for me was not a difficult fight to give to Gennady, but yet Harold Letterman, rest in peace. We all loved Harold, but I think he caused some of these issues. By the way, he also really used to do a great job of educating and explaining to the fans the 4 criteria. He used to actually say it on the air.
Yes.
But later on in his career, he got a little lazy, and he would say, whatever Marquez is doing, Pacquiao's the guy coming forward and just throwing the punches and blah, 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 blah. And that's not how you score a fight. And Harold probably knew better, and maybe he's saying, well, Smitty, I'm sure he would be agreeing with me. Because again, if we're not going to implement the 4 criteria, then just change it and just make boxing be all about who throws more punches. We have a measuring stick for that, CompuBox.
We do.
But you're one of the leading authorities on the planet about CompuBox, but you know damn well that it doesn't always tell the entire story. And it really didn't tell the entire story Saturday in the undisputed heavyweight championship. It was a great part of it, but that I just wish. And the problem is, and I don't call announcers out by name. Most all of them are pretty weak, but I don't call them out by name. But none of them explain. None of them. You correct me if I'm wrong. Do any of them ever explain how to score a fight?
No, not really. They usually have a guest person that jumps in every so often and explains how they score the round. Sometimes they go into a deeper explanation of why they do it, but they only have like 30 or 40 seconds to really explain, and it's pretty hard to do that.
And we know a Hall of Fame judge. I know one. He's no longer. There was a Hall of Fame judge that didn't even know what ring generalship meant. And when I asked him, did not know what it meant. I had to explain it to him. And he apparently was a damn good judge because he's in the Hall of Fame. So I think that's something, the great thing is it's something we can improve upon. Imagine if we just create a graphic. And by the way, networks out there, these wonderful, great boxing networks, a couple of things. Get away from calling it a combat sport, because we're not a combat sport, and put up a graphic. Create a little graphic that you show several times when you go to I'll use a name, and not in a bad, because I think this guy is actually improved, Mannix's scorecard. Before, when a guy like Mannix goes to it, put the graphic up and then let him, I think that would really help educate the fans. All right. That should have been a Smitty says, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, we talked about Usyk. Let's talk about upsets. And there were several upsets from this past weekend. On the Usyk Fury undercard, we saw Anthony Kakachi stop Joe Cordina in round 8 to become the new IBF champ at 130. Cordina entered the fight as a minus 575 favorite on DraftKings. And the fight really turned in round 3 when Kakachi nailed Cordina on the break and scored the first knockdown moments later. And he never really recovered from that. Kakachi was in control and he finished the job in round 8. We also saw on that undercard heavyweight Ajit Kabayel, a sizable underdog despite his impressive TKO victory over Arslanbek Makhmudov last December. He stopped Frank Sanchez in round 7. Both of them were 24-0. Kabayel comes out 25-0. Frank Sanchez 24-1. And with the win, Kabayel is now the WBC's mandatory challenger, which kind of starts to, the winds are starting to blow toward potential fracturing of the title pretty soon. And then switching over to ESPN later on, we saw 2 more upsets. Brian Norman Jr. became the WBO's interim champion at welterweight with a 10th round TKO against the top-rated Giovanni Santillan, who was undefeated coming in. And should Terence Crawford beat Madrimov and become the new WBA champ at 154, we expect Crawford to stay at 154 and vacate the titles. And when he does vacate the title, Norman will likely become the new full WBO titleist at 147. And then in the main event, Ukraine, there's the other U, scored its 3rd huge victory in 6 days when Denys Berinchyk won a split decision against Emmanuel Navarrete to win the vacant WBO lightweight title. So first it was Lomachenko over Kambosos for the IBF lightweight title. Then it was Usyk to capture the undisputed heavyweight championship. And now Berinchyk joins Loma as a champ at 135.
And by the way, you and I didn't really think that was much of an upset. We both thought he had a great shot to beat Navarrete, who's so vulnerable, has made the most. I think he's hit his ceiling, by the way, and that fight was scored correctly for Berinchyk. With given what Ukraine is going through, and of course, remember the reason why I picked Usyk to win the fight, because he was fighting for more than just undisputed belts and record. He was fighting for his country. I think all of them represent that. And also on another level, think about how great Ukraine has become when it comes to the sport of boxing. Yes. I mean, they are phenomenal. We used to talk about Cuba, right? And Ukraine is unbelievable. Yeah, hats off to all of them. And hopefully other good stuff will happen for their country. But certainly they all have that in mind when they enter the squared circle. Yeah, you are right. But that Berinchyk, we both, because you and I had a conversation, you told me when the fight was signed, this guy's got a great shot at winning. And he did.
Yes. He really did. I really loved his movement, his ability to switch stances so fluidly. He even switched stances while throwing punches, and he still retains his balance.
Yeah.
I said that this wasn't going to be one for the textbooks. It certainly wasn't. It was kind of an ugly fight, but Berinchyk did what he needed to do, and he was so inspired by what Usyk did earlier in the day. It really gave him a boost. And this really does put a different light on Oleksandr Usyk's fight against David Benavidez on June 15th. So who knows if Ukraine will continue.
I think it ends with Berinchyk, but go ahead. Continue.
All right. Well, finally, we must address another fight that took place on the Usyk-Fury undercard. This wasn't an upset, really. Sergey Kovalev lost a lopsided decision to undefeated Swede Robin Sirwan Safar. The Crusher tried his best, but his 41-year-old body simply could not summon the echoes of his prime. And it was particularly sad to see him get knocked down in the fight's final seconds. What are your thoughts about the fight, and what are your thoughts about the man? Because you knew him pretty well, didn't you?
Yeah, I did a lot of wonderful interviews with him, and what's really will be sad is if he continues. He's shot. Yeah. He's been shot for a long time. Not only with what he's done inside the squared circle, some of the issues he's had outside the squared circle, but it doesn't matter. He's finished as a top-tier prize fighter. You know my thoughts on the damage that can be done as these athletes continue. We're both heading to the International Boxing Hall of Fame. I believe when he should call it a day right now. Yeah. And then he will join us there in 3 or 4 years maybe 5 at the most. I think he belongs in the International Boxing Hall of Fame. The Crusher has done it all. And at one time, he was even a pound for pound, probably type fighter with what he accomplished, certainly with his prodigious power. And I've had some wonderful times with him, interviewing him. And I understand you have a story with him. I think he crushed you or did something.
Well, sort of. But about 10 years ago, I was working a show with CompuBox for an NBCSN show. Those shows were run by Kathy Duva, which was Kovalev's promoter. And they were in the ring. This is hours before the show even went on the air, but they were in the ring rehearsing some sort of segment that they were going to have on the show. And they were doing it in the ring. And when they were done, I was at ringside at my workstation. I was taking a couple of notes. And while I was doing so, I felt something thud right on the side of my head. And I looked down, and it turns out that Kovalev threw these little mini boxing gloves with his label and his nickname on them. And so, in a way,
that's your version of an in-ring segment or an outside the ring segment. That's the closest Lee says he's ever going to go to an in-ring segment. He handled the shot. He parried it a little bit. And then he did what we're going to do right now, and that's go to a commercial break. Back with more in this corner of the podcast. 122. Shame on you, Crusher. We'll be back.
I got 2 options. Option 1, I can accept defeat. Option 2, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Back in this corner of the podcast, 122 with Lee Groves. What's up next, Lee? It says on my my scorecard here, Block B.
Well, yeah, Block B. We're talking about the ramifications of the Usyk Fury fight, and now we have to put Usyk's name first. He won, right? So, Tyson Fury, right after the decision was announced, he was being interviewed, and during his post-fight comments, he said that he lost the decision in part because of the sentiment regarding the Russian-Ukraine war. People were feeling certain ways about Ukraine and its underdog struggle against Russia, and how that sentiment denied him the decision. There was a story that I read this morning, and we're taping on Wednesday. Fury's promoter, Frank Warren, defended Fury by citing Fury's bipolar diagnosis, saying that one of the symptoms is saying exactly what's on your mind without thinking of the results from what you say. Do you see that as a valid explanation?
It's garbage. Oh, you mean what Frank said?
What Frank said.
What Frank said, yes. Yes, I think it makes perfect sense. What Fury said is garbage. And, he should know better than to say that. Asking him to have a little bit of class, maybe that's too much to ask right after a fight, given all we know about him and what went into the fight. Ukraine did have a lot to do with it. It had a hell of a lot to do with it. It had a lot to do with it because it fueled Usyk to fight that type of fight against that, big of a man and pull off the victory. But as far as I think Frank did and said what he should say for his fighter, mitigating what was said. But I do agree with Frank on that.
Right, but not with what Fury said, of course. Yeah, so now with Usyk winning, this makes the pound-for-pound race even more interesting. After Naoya Inoue stopped Lewis Neri a few weeks ago, I said that the pound-for-pound race consisted of 3 guys, Terrence Crawford, Naoya Inoue, and Usyk if he defeated Tyson Fury. And then it's those 3 and then everybody else, really. I feel that these 3 have separated themselves from the rest of the pack because they're the only three male boxers to have won undisputed championships in the four-belt era in two weight classes.
Great point.
And Usyk, he is actually the first boxer ever to be undisputed at cruiserweight and heavyweight. And for those of you who are shouting, what about Evander Holyfield? I say this. Holyfield was indeed undisputed at cruiserweight. But when he defeated Riddick Bowe in 1990, the WBO champion was still out there. So under boxing's definition of four-belt era undisputed, you have to go back all the way to 1988 for that designation. So for further explanation of my stance, you could either watch last week's show or you can look at my X account. It's all there. But for me right now, and this is a snapshot, it's Usyk number 1, Inoue number 2, and Crawford number 3. And only because Usyk and Inoue have turned in impressive performances recently. And Bud hasn't fought since destroying Errol Spence 10 months ago. If Bud, in my mind, if Bud impressively beats Madrimov to win a belt in a 4th weight class, I'll certainly consider restoring him at number 1. But what are your thoughts on the pound-for-pound race?
Oh, first off, I want to clarify something. When Lee says his X account, he doesn't mean his OnlyFans or anything like that. He means he's saying X for Twitter there. Just wanted to clarify that because I know you've got fans who would probably want to see you beyond this broadcast. But having said that, you know what? Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn now. This pound-for-pound stuff, it's so clouded, and I used to love it. And I agree with everything you just said. The greatest thing was what Crawford said. Terrence went right on X and other things and said that, hey, I have no problem with Usyk being, I'm paraphrasing here, being number 1. He deserves it, man. Give him his props. That's from Crawford. Wonder how many other, wonder if Canelo would have said that. I don't know.
Right.
But Crawford did. Look, we have to have a criteria for what constitute or designates pound for pound. And because of the inactivity of fighters these days, it's really difficult to keep a guy up there because of, like, let's say my eye test tells me Crawford's the best. However, the eyes aren't all of it. What about activity and what you do? Right now, given those three, I'd have to say number 1 would be Usyk because of what he just accomplished. The other, but it really doesn't matter. They are all at the highest pantheon of that, those three guys. And here's the great thing, that we have greatness. We have 3, and we might even have a few, but we have 3 great fighters. And I think that in and of itself deserves tremendous respect given all the issues that we chronicle about boxing. I think honestly, I don't have that coin from last week, but it's flip of a coin, isn't it?
It really is flip of a coin. And before I go further, I want to make a correction here. It was when Evander Holyfield beat Buster Douglas.
Yes.
Brain fart. It happens.
Yeah, well, you better, because they'd be on you, attacking you on X for that.
Yes, so. They would. Yes,
okay,
they would.
Continue on.
Okay, so finally, what's next for both guys after all of this? Now, as far as I'm concerned, Fury has already activated the contractually mandated rematch clause, and it's widely believed that the rematch would take place in October back in Saudi Arabia. But that's where I think is next. There is the Hrgovic versus Daniel Dubois fight. We don't know whether that's for a title as we speak or not, but there's still some business out there. And since Usyk was the underdog going into the fight, it could be a make sure kind of fight to make sure that Usyk really is the better heavyweight champion or the better heavyweight of the era than Tyson Fury is. And if he wins the rematch, he beats Joshua twice, and then he beats Fury twice. That should pretty much answer the question. But what do you think both guys should do? What do you think similarly to me, or do you have your own?
No. First off, I think I love to see when an athlete quits on top. What better time for the man from Ukraine to retire from boxing? Undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, unbeaten, was an Olympic champion. He's got all kinds of things he can do to represent the sport, represent and help Ukraine, perhaps raise money, things like that. Keep his faculties all intact, because they are now, and just sail away into the sunset. Come hang out with me in Canastota. Egis, Egis Klemus, his man, if you're listening, please give him my counsel there. There's always going to be another damn fight. Back in the day, we would always make excuses for fighters. Oh, he needs the money. Now he can accentuate what he did, capitalize, and make more. These guys are so beyond wealthy that it's not about money, and it's not about legacy anymore. He cemented that. So what better time to call it a day? As for Fury, given everything we've seen him go through, the ups and downs, the highs and lows, the ebbs and everything, the ebbs and flows, with his mental health issues, and with what he's accomplished and his wealth, he's probably got more money than Usyk. So sail away, call it a day, and do reality shows, take care of your health. And you, by the way, you could join, we could have that rematch, but it could be sitting down with Smitty at the International Boxing Hall of Fame in about 4 years. They both could be there. They both could go in. Just think about that. They could go in together.
They can go in together.
That's Absolutely. What I think they should both do. Call it a day. We saw the fight. These guys aren't 27. They're 35 and 37. By the time we see any rematch, Usyk's pushing 40. The other guy's pushing 36 or 30. We don't need to see. I know it would be October, supposedly. But that's my thought. Call it a day. Sayonara.
All right. And speaking of sayonara, that's sayonara for the segment.
All right. But what do we have next? My favorite, because it's called what?
Smitty Says.
Will says that after you seize this. We'll be back.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Final segment in this corner of the podcast, $122. By the way, Lee, I'll see you in person, not via the Zoom in just a few weeks in Canastota. You getting excited for the 2024 version?
The International Boxing Hall of Fame's induction weekend is it is the time of year for me. It really is. This will be my 30th. I think it's my 30th, or maybe even beyond, my 30th trip to Canastota. And great memories. It's a great time to reunite with friends that I've made up there, to see the legends, to see the legends get immortalized, visit with you, of course, and can't wait to do it.
And by the way, you better have your game face on, because I got news for you. When I I pass the baton to you on Saturday as I leave to head to host the Banquet of Champions at Turning Stone, there on, I guess that'll be June 8th, I believe. And you take the baton, and you'll be doing something that we don't know exactly what it is yet, so we'll find out. So anyway, all right, where are we?
Well, we're on the Smitty Says segment, and let's begin. You have long been a proponent of same-day weigh-ins, because that really is the only way to preserve the integrity of the weight classes. You want to see featherweights fight for a featherweight championship, not welterweights fighting for the featherweight championship, okay? So, but the next best thing, the same-day weigh-ins are long gone. But the next best thing are day of the fight weigh-in checks with strict rehydration limits. The IBF instituted those a few years ago, I think they have a 10-pound rehydration limit. And now that it appears that the WBA will be starting them pretty soon. What are your thoughts about these rehydration weigh-ins, and do you think they're handling it in the right way?
Well, they haven't handled it in the right way since, back in the 1600s, I think. When I had my little pugilistic career for a few years, we did what I, of course, think should be done. It won't be done the way it was back then. Same day weigh-ins, as you mentioned, where you go into the ring the weight you're supposed to. And if you can't make that weight, then you simply go up in weight, the next, whenever you fight again or whatever. That was part of the beauty of boxing, is making the weight, making it properly and whatever. The thought process was good when they changed it, but it backfired as I predicted it would, with the rehydration and what have you. So there is I think a solution that works well, and that would be to simply have the fighters do the day of weigh-in with a clause that they can't exceed whatever percentage, but it can't be just 1%, because where the weight gain affects most would be, from like flyweight through featherweight or whatever, your minimum weight through your bantamweight or whatever. That somewhere in there, it should be like they can't weigh more than 3% of the contracted weight. And then you go up maybe to 5, maybe the rest of the way. But what I mean by that, we're going to have another show to explain it, is it really makes a huge difference when let's say a featherweight has to fight a guy that is like, 10 pounds more than him. It's just huge. It's why Gervonta Davis, in my opinion, would knock out, in a way. He'd knock him out. And that doesn't mean he's better. He would just be, that's where it matters. So I think it's so simple. Get somebody who knows math a whole lot better than me, but I think somewhere along 3% of the contracted weights from, up until about 126 pounds, and then from $130 all the way through, maybe 5%. That's really, really going to preserve the integrity of the weight classes. Otherwise, there's no reason to have weight classes when a guy that's a featherweight comes into the ring weighing what? Literally a welterweight, right? It's happened. It has happened.
It's happened.
And some of your greatest fighters, Canelo's done it, and it's gone on with Gotti did it. And how many guys could you name that do it now? Most fighters actually do it now. You know why they do it? Because they can. Because they can get away with it. And it's so easy to fix, and I don't understand why boxing doesn't fix it.
Well, shifting to the second subject of the Smitty Says, you kind of alluded to this earlier in the show, but there were some criticisms that you had of both the ESPN broadcast and the DAZN broadcast that we saw. What are some of the elements that you thought they fell short on?
That would take a show,
Okay.
But let me break it down. And again, I'm not going to, because a few of these guys I would consider them, a few of them are friends. But there has become so much sensationalism, and it's contrived. It's not like Don Dunphy doing a call where he organically says something, or Cosell, down goes Frazier, or in other sports, do you believe in miracles, or it happened? Those are, or for me, when I said it is over, Tim Burr, I didn't have that written out. It was organic. It came naturally. Yeah. And what I think makes a great broadcaster is the spontaneity to see and call and deliver with some flair and accuracy. And now I can tell that so many are just completely scripted. And when you have cameras, and this really started with UFC, where we're going to film you, and you go, oh, it's garbage for me. I mean, I guess people love it. They want to see some broadcasters scream and sweat and whatever. And during the Usyk fight, when stuff was going on and Fury was floundering around the ring, if I were calling that fight, I would have more so talked about what both guys were doing as best you can. But if you do get overly excited, like my friend Colonel Bob would do at times, then it's natural. And Bob, would let out a yelp, but then he would get right back into what was happening. The ropes held him up. The ref could stop, and he does. He calls it, and I think that's all gotten lost with just being sensationalism, because we know if we can put up that clip afterwards and it'll get us X number of hits. So I think spontaneity with accuracy and flair and organically is the route that they should go. We mentioned in an earlier segment about explaining how to properly score a fight, or at least give the people the opportunity, because a lot of the fans out there, it's not their fault. They have no clue. There was people working that fight that everybody watched Saturday that I've asked years ago, do you know what the 4 criteria are? And that person did not know it. I'm sure he does now. And by the way, a lot of them have gotten better. But in terms of the direction we're going, because I believe, maybe it's because of my age, the professor hat, educating the fans, because I think when you educate everybody, it lends to getting away from all the controversy. Or if there is real controversy, you'll know it because you'll know what's right. Like for those that are saying that Mark Nelson made this no, he didn't. He did a great job. He did just the opposite of what you think. But some of the British broadcasters, and one, for example, an ex-fighter, said that he should have stopped the fight, and that had that been the other way around, they would have. And no. Nelson wasn't going to stop the fight. He did the right thing. So education is paramount. I hope you agree with me on that.
I do agree. And also maybe a deeper dive into the nuts and bolts of strategy and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, you have fighters on there that are color commentators. Far better fighters than I ever was, that's for damn sure, but certainly not better commentators, because they don't explain. They fall into the narrative of going along with the broadcaster, who typically is a guy who never laced a pair of gloves on. Some of them claim they had amateur careers and stuff. I never saw them in a ring. But these guys that are doing it, and now I will, like a Sergio Mora or a Tim Bradley, and Andre and others that were great, great fighters or really good fighters, and some Hall of Famers, talk about what the fans don't see that they need to see, or what fighter A needs to do or not do, and fighter B. And a lot of the times they do that. That's their job. And of course, to try to improve as a broadcaster, as a commentator along the way. And we all can improve. To this day, I try to improve. You try to improve. Hopefully they try to improve.
Yeah. And finally, a little twist on the Smitty Says segment. Call it a Groves gripe, you might say.
All right. What do you want to bitch about, Lee?
Well, two little points. First,
what's wrong with us today? We need this portion of the broadcast sponsored by lisinopril, or so. We're going to need blood pressure medication for this. Go ahead.
Yeah. Anybody who knows me well knows that I don't complain a lot. I'm kind of a positive guy, but there were a couple of things that irked me about last week's coverage. One was the insistence on presenting Lennox Lewis as the last undisputed heavyweight champion, and not fact-checking Lennox when he declared during one of the interview segments that by being undisputed, he had done something that neither Evander Holyfield or Mike Tyson had done. Now, you could take the two sides of the last undisputed champion argument. I explained them last week on Twitter/X. But for them not to say, well, wait a minute, Lennox, Mike Tyson actually was an undisputed champion. You can quibble as to whether he was the last one or not, but he was, because when he knocked out Michael Spinks to take Spinks's lineal championship in 1988, he was three-belt undisputed champion, right? And the lineal champion. So he was undisputed, not that. So, and then anyway, the second one, I guess it would have been embarrassing to fact check Lennox on camera. That probably wouldn't have been cool. But maybe for future, off camera for future reference, hey, Lennox, don't say that. This is what, and then that was it. But facts are facts. Tyson was undisputed, and that is.
Well, I love Lennox. Let me ask you: if I'm sitting next to him doing that, do you think I would have called? I would have called. Do you think I would have told him? I would have.
You probably would have, yeah.
Because that's who I am, and he. But
yes.
I think he would respect it more, because maybe he is confused on it, or something, or I don't. Lennox is a pretty cool dude, and but that's the job of it's called journalism and broadcasting, and they can combine, and that's what you have to do, I think. And there's of course showmanship in it, and the Colonel, the late great Bob Sheridan, Hall of Famer, said, "Jimmy, I can't do his accent, but never let accuracy get in the way of a good broadcast." Ha ha ha. And what he meant by that was have fun with it. And but there's a proper and appropriate way to talk. It could have turned into a little discussion, and they have the time. There's usually so much time in between these fights and what have you. But so the bottom line is, a lot of these guys, they listen to this show, they watch this show. So do it the right way, improve. And we'll continue to do that on this show. Do we have anything else, or are we out of here?
Well, we have one more little quibble.
Okay.
I also spotted an error in a graphic that ESPN used in association with Emmanuel Navarrete's attempt to become the next Mexican-born fighter to win a widely recognized belt in a fourth weight class. And that graphic correctly included Saul Canelo Alvarez, Eric Morales, Juan Manuel Marquez, and Jorge Arce. But the graphic also included Leo Santa Cruz. And technically that's an error, because according to a PBC biography of Santa Cruz, and he was with PBC, he was born in California after the rest of his family, who were born in Mexico. They immigrated to the U.S. Leo was born after that. And of course, this doesn't make, for me,
well, you just add to it Mexican heritage. You just simply say,
yes,
and one that is of Mexican heritage, and then you get it right.
Yes, you absolutely get it right. And while the rest of Leo's family was born in Mexico, Leo was born here. And of course, nationality is determined by where someone is born. That's how I see it. And this doesn't make Leo any less of a fighter. I think he's going to be in the Hall of Fame someday. But although he fought like a Mexican, he wasn't born in Mexico. It's a fine point, but it's a point. Again, a little niggling thing. And then well, there is one. You know what?
But I really appreciate that, because even when I interview a Joe Frazier, everybody thinks of Joe from where? Philly, but he wasn't. In South Carolina.
Correct.
People think of Joe Louis from where? Detroit, but he was, I think, born in Alabama. Yeah.
Right.
And speaking
Thomas
of Joe,
Hearns.
Yeah, Tommy Hearns. I think it was Memphis. Yeah. I think he's Memphis. Yeah.
So I think it was Memphis.
It just takes 10 seconds to explain,
It does. It really does. And there is a fight that's coming up this weekend that's of particular import across the pond. And that's the long delayed rematch between Josh Taylor and Jack Catterall. It's going to take place Saturday. And it is a rematch of a February 2022 fight. in which Taylor controversially retained his undisputed 140-pound title by split decision. And if the buildup is any indicator, the bitter feelings haven't lessened one little bit. Before the first fight, Taylor was a minus 1,700 favorite, and Catterall was a plus 765 underdog. But after that performance and after what's happened in the last couple of years, Catterall is actually the minus 120 favorite, and Taylor is the plus 110 underdog. I mean, how time changes things.
Yeah, all right. Who do you, I here's my pick. DQ. It's going to be a disqualification. So that's what is your pick?
Well, my pick is, Howard Cosell said that there are horses for courses, there are styles for fighters. And 2 years ago, many, including me, thought Catterall did enough to win the first time. Back then, he was denied the decision, and that was because, in part, it was in Glasgow. Well, now the rematch is taking place in England. That's Catterall's territory, and I think he's going to get the benefit of the doubt. I think he's going to win a decision, Catterall by decision. And by the way, I understand that you were part of an event last week in Las Vegas that honored the legendary Brown bomber, Joe Louis.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, the city, honored Joe. He has ties. He never fought in Nevada, but he was part of the ownership of the Moulin Rouge when it opened up. One of the first black establishments here in Vegas. He was, of course, a greeter at Caesar's Palace. He spent many a night at Caesar's and others sitting ringside later, after his career when he retired. He was beloved here in Las Vegas. And his daughter, Joyce Barrow Henderson, was here, and I got to meet her. And the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame, Michelle Corrales Lewis, asked me. She's the CEO and president of the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame, for which I am an inductee. She asked me to speak, and I went up there and spoke about Joe and his tremendous boxing prowess and his legacy. And so it was a very cool evening getting to do that. And I got to tell the story, and I don't know if I've told this on this show or not, but and I got a little emotional up there because I got to meet Joe Louis, and the reason I got to meet and shake his hand was because of him right there. It was, I think, I don't know if it was before Ali Foreman fought, but there was a press conference on Miami Beach. Foreman was there, and Joe was there. Joe Louis was there, and Muhammad Ali saw me with, I don't know if I was with I think I was with Bundini off to the side below the podium there and the stage. And Ali spotted me and told Bundini to get me up there, and Bundini brought me halfway up, and Ali took me right up, and he says, "You think I'm great? I'm going to introduce you to the great Joe Louis. You're never going to forget this." And Ali took me up and said, "Joe, this is my main man." He called me I think he called me Little Jimmy. And imagine him introducing me to the picture that we'll put up, Joe Louis, the great Joe Louis. And everybody was moved by that, and I'm still moved by that. And Muhammad, thank you, for that, for taking that time. But boy, we'll certainly do some Joe Louis will always be a part of these broadcasts. So, because it's hard. You talk about 11 years, 8 months, 8 days, 25 successful title defenses, the way he did it, the way he represented this country. Nothing is greater than Joe Louis when it comes to prize fighting, in my opinion. Agreed. And on that, absolutely. I think that's a way to wrap it up and sail off into the sunset. In this corner of the podcast with Lee Groves, Smitty. So long, everybody.